Yes, hello folks. My name is Anthony Reddie, and it's my pleasure and my privilege to be sharing with you on this occasion of Remembrance Sunday, as we remember the sacrifices that have been made by men and women in the past. Obviously, it's a strange time for us in terms of being Christians. Well, a strange time for us actually being human beings. I was really looking forward to actually being with you on this occasion at Queen's College, not least of all because I spent 13 years working at a college called Queen's College in Birmingham, although not as illustrious or as famous as your college in Oxford University. Sadly, I will not be able to share with you on this occasion, physically at least, but hopefully on another occasion. It's actually a strange moment really for me to be here preaching on this particular Sunday, on Remembrance Sunday, because for years I've always studiously avoided it. It was often a common, well-known joke that if you're a Methodist local preacher, lay preacher in ordinary language, which is what I am, that the two Sundays you would always avoid being available to preach, because at least as a layperson, you get the choice, clergy don't, was often on Trinity Sunday, because it's just too difficult to explain the Trinity to ordinary folk, and also on Remembrance Sunday. However, when I was invited by your chaplain to come and to share a word with you this morning, I thought, well, why not? Why not? I guess part of my disclosure, really, in terms of why I never liked preaching on this particular Sunday, is because it just seemed to me to be odd that oftentimes it seemed to be tinged with elements of jingoism. And as I suppose someone who's a fairly unreconstructed lefty, I always found the implications around war and imperialism and empire to be things that I was never going to support, and therefore it just seemed uncomfortable to be preaching on such a Sunday. There was always a danger of celebrating war. We see the films, we see the nostalgia around it, and there's something dangerous about celebrating what is in effect always a sign of human failure. That one of my heroes is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., noted leader of the Civil Rights Movement, but actually, first and foremost, a Baptist preacher and a radical theologian. And Martin Luther King was a staunch pacifist. Absolutely, he would make no concessions to his belief in pacifism. And for him, he felt that war was always a sign of human failure, that in terms of ways of settling human disputes, war is a pretty poor way of doing it. And so for him, he saw no reason to ever celebrate war. Now, in fairness, a lot of the commemoration services we have and remembrance services are not about celebrating war, in all fairness, but oftentimes they have that tinge of slipping into it, or slipping into a kind of lazy jingoism. And as I said, that's one of the things that I've often found very uncomfortable and therefore have never wanted to be a part of. That said, I think it's important that we do hold in tension both the critique of forms of national celebration, and this is where the Amos text comes in terms of the way in which the writer, a radical prophet speaking truth to power, is saying that actually the God of the Judeo-Christian tradition, or certainly the Jewish tradition in this particular context, is one that really wants justice and wants equity, but is against all forms of vacuous celebrations that often miss the point in terms of what God wants. And again, as I said, I think at the worst, what we sometimes get around Remembrance Sunday is a kind of glorification that misses the point that actually at the heart of this is misery for millions of untold people, ordinary men and women who sacrifice themselves for causes that were not of their making. At this point, obviously, I'm bringing in a very, sort of left-wing, even slash sort of Marxist critique of the way in which often wars are propagated by the powerful and the privileged, and the real sacrifice and the real payment in terms of death and misery is that often affected by ordinary people. But as I said, that has to be balanced with a sense of respect and even nobility of those who do sacrifice their lives for causes that we believe are important in terms of bringing about justice and equity and demonstrating love, particularly for the underdog. I think it's essential that we remind ourselves that actually, as a New Testament text from John, our gospel text reminds us, particularly verse 13, that says, "Greater love has no man than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And for my critique, what I do not want anyone to hear is any diminution of the significance of that. Is the significance of people who lay down their lives, either voluntarily or not voluntarily, in terms of making a sacrifice for something bigger, something more noble, something that enhances the human spirit rather than diminishes it. And that, I think, is of huge importance. Actually, one of the things that enabled me, I think, to think about preaching this sermon this morning, I'm recording it now in the morning, but obviously it will be played on Sunday evening in your chapel, is this book here. It's by James H. Cone, and it is his penultimate book. It's called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Now, James Cone is the architect of Black liberation theology. I'm a Black liberation theologian, so I owe my identity as a scholar entirely, really, to this man. So The Cross and the Lynching Tree first came out, I believe, in 2009. And what Cone was talking about, he was making the connection between lynching of African-American men, lynching of men and women, actually, I shouldn't have said men, of men and women by racism, by white supremacy, that wanted to try and make a point, try to instill fear into Black people in order to reassert notions of white supremacy. And Cone compares the lynching of these ordinary men and women to Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, and says, actually, part of the problem we have in Christianity is that we glorify what is effectively an instrument of torture and death and misery, the cross. Crucifixion wasn't just a way of killing people, it's a way of humiliating them and sending a political message to your enemies to say, if you try to mess with us, this is what will happen to you. This is the ultimate payment. It's not just a death, it's a misery, it's a death of misery that will take you 2 or 3 days to die. And Cone says, actually, if Christians understood, particularly white Christians, white racist Christians in America, if they understood the reality of the sacrifice of what Jesus' cross meant, then they would not have been so willing to engage in the type of horrors that one sees in terms of lynching. I share this in the context of having just gone through Black History Month and in the context of post-George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, to remind us that actually there are different types of sacrificial deaths. There are those such as the ones that we remember and celebrate in terms of people who voluntarily chose to go and fight evil in the Second World War, to fight fascism in order to ensure justice and to ensure liberty and freedom for all people, particularly in Western Europe. But also we have to remember the sacrifice that were imposed upon people who had no choice. The men, countless men and women, often with no names that we don't remember them now, who were lynched, who were killed simply because they were in the wrong body. And Jesus says in the text from John 15 that this is my command, verse 17, to love one another, to love one another. And it seems to me that a fundamental failure of war is our failure to be human. It's our failure to be all the things that God wanted us to be in terms of love and solidarity with each other. And so on this day, in these few words I've tried to share with you, I want to remember sacrifice. Sacrificial love that enables people to give up, to struggle for something greater, but also to remember those people who are sacrificed. But yet their death, I believe, reminds us of the corruption of the human spirit, and hopefully inspires us to do better so that in the future we don't need to have these services, because we can find ways of loving each other that make war unnecessary. Thank you very much for listening to me and for put up with my rambles. I'm not very good at speaking to Canva. I would be much better in person, I promise you. But hopefully that will be for another occasion. Thank you very much. God bless. Bye.